My name is Matthew, and I never expected a case of mistaken identity to completely change my life. It happened on a rainy October evening in Boston when I was walking home from my job at the city library. At 26, my life was predictably ordinary. I spent my days cataloging books, my evenings reading them, and my weekends usually alone. That night, I was hurrying through the drizzle, collar turned up against the wind, when I heard a sharp command behind me. "Stop right there! Police! Hands where I can see them!" My heart nearly stopped as I slowly raised my hands, turning to find myself staring down the barrel of a gun. The officer holding it was tall, broad-shouldered, with intense green eyes focused entirely on me. His badge identified him as Officer Andrew Morrison. "Up against the wall," he ordered, his voice firm but not cruel. "Spread your legs." I complied, my hands trembling as I pressed them against the wet brick wall. The rain was soaking through my clothes as Officer Morrison approached, keeping his gun trained on me with one hand while the other began to pat me down. His touch was professional but thorough, moving methodically across my body. Despite my fear, I couldn't help but notice the warmth of his hands through my wet clothes, the subtle scent of his cologne mixing with the rain. "ID," he demanded, and I carefully reached for my wallet with shaking hands. As he examined my driver's license, his expression changed. "Matthew Parker?" He looked from the ID to my face several times, then lowered his gun. "Damn, you match the description of a suspect we're looking for, but this isn't you." The relief that flooded through me was immediately followed by a wave of dizziness. My knees buckled slightly, and Officer Morrison quickly caught my arm to steady me. "Hey, easy there." His voice had completely changed, now full of concern. "I'm so sorry about this. Let me make it up to you. Let me buy you a coffee," Officer Morrison said, holstering his weapon. "You're shaking, and you're soaked through. There's a diner around the corner." I should have been angry about being mistaken for a criminal, should have wanted to file a complaint or at least walk away. Instead, I found myself nodding, drawn to the genuine remorse in his eyes and the gentle way he still held my arm. The diner was warm and nearly empty, the fluorescent lights harsh after the dim street. We slid into a booth, and Andrew, as he insisted I call him, ordered coffee for both of us. "I really am sorry," he said once we were settled. "The suspect we're looking for has the same build as you, similar height, was wearing similar clothes, but I should have been more certain before drawing my weapon." "It's okay," I found myself saying, wrapping my cold hands around the warm coffee mug. "I understand you were just doing your job." He studied me for a moment, his green eyes intense. Most people wouldn't be this understanding. They'd be threatening to sue the department, or at least demanding my badge number. I shrugged, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened under his gaze. "I work at the library. I understand making mistakes based on descriptions, though usually the worst that happens is someone gets the wrong book." That made him laugh, a rich, warm sound that seemed to fill the small diner. "A librarian? That explains the messenger bag full of books." He leaned forward slightly. "What were you reading before I so rudely interrupted your evening?" The conversation flowed easily after that. Andrew was surprisingly well-read for a cop, and we spent the next hour discussing everything from classic literature to modern crime novels. He had opinions about Dostoevsky that made me laugh, and his take on modern detective fiction was fascinating given his actual experience in law enforcement. "I should probably let you get home," he said finally, though he made no move to leave. "But would you maybe want to get coffee again sometime, when I'm not pointing a gun at you?" We exchanged numbers, and Andrew texted me the very next day to apologize again and suggest meeting that weekend. Over coffee turned into lunch, which evolved into a long walk through the public garden. I found myself captivated by the way he moved, confident but not aggressive, always aware of his surroundings, but completely focused on our conversation. "So why did you become a cop?" I asked as we sat on a bench near the swan boats. Andrew was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My father was a cop, his father too. It was expected, I suppose, but I stayed because I genuinely want to help people." He turned to look at me, though lately I've been questioning some things about myself. The intensity in his eyes made my heart race. What kind of things? Things like how I can't stop thinking about a certain librarian, he said softly. How I've never felt this kind of connection with anyone before, male or female. Andrew, I know it's complicated, he continued. I'm not out at work. Being a gay cop, it's not easy. But there's something about you, Matthew, something that makes me want to be honest with myself and with you. Before I could respond, his radio crackled to life. He was still on duty, though on his lunch break. He sighed and stood. I have to go, but would you have dinner with me tonight? A real date? That evening, Andrew picked me up in his personal car, a well-maintained, older model Mustang. He'd changed out of his uniform into dark jeans and a blue button-down that made his eyes seem even more intense. He took me to a small Italian restaurant in the North End, tucked away on a side street. I come here sometimes after tough shifts, he explained as we were seated in a cozy corner booth. The owner, Marco, he doesn't care that I'm a cop, just treats me like anyone else. Over pasta and wine, Andrew opened up more about his life. He'd been married briefly in his early 20s, an attempt to be what everyone expected him to be. She figured it out before I did, he admitted, said she'd rather have me as a friend than a husband living a lie. Our relationship developed quickly after that first real date. Andrew would stop by the library during his patrol, ostensibly checking on the building's security, but really just to see me. I found myself looking forward to the sight of his uniform appearing between the bookshelves, the subtle wink he'd give me when no one was looking. We had to be careful, of course. Boston might be progressive, but Andrew wasn't out to his fellow officers, and the police department wasn't known for its acceptance. We developed a routine of meeting at my apartment, where he could be himself without fear of being seen. One evening, about a month into our relationship, Andrew arrived at my door still in uniform, looking troubled. As soon as I let him in, he pulled me into a fierce embrace. Rough day? I asked, feeling the tension in his body. Had to respond to a hate crime, he said quietly. Gay kid beaten up outside a club. While I'm taking the report, my partner keeps making these comments, these jokes. He pulled back to look at me. I wanted to say something, wanted to tell him to shut up, but I couldn't without raising suspicions. I led him to the couch, helping him remove his utility belt and outer vest. You're doing what you need to stay safe, I said, though my heart ached for both him and that victim. Am I? He caught my hand, his grip tight. Or am I just being a coward? Hey, I turned his face to mine. You're one of the bravest people I know. You put your life on the line every day to protect people. Coming out, that has to be on your own terms. His response was to kiss me, hard and desperate at first, then softening into something deeper. We ended up making love right there on the couch, still half-dressed, his uniform shirt hanging open as he moved above me. There was something both thrilling and tender about being with him while he wore the symbol of his public identity, even as he expressed his private truth. Afterward, as we lay tangled together, Andrew traced patterns on my skin. I want to take you to dinner tomorrow, he said suddenly. To Marco's place. We've been there before, I reminded him. Yes, but, he hesitated. This time, I want to hold your hand. In public, I'm tired of pretending you're just a friend when we're out together. The next evening at Marco's was both wonderful and terrifying. Andrew held my hand as we walked from the car to the restaurant, and though I could feel him trembling slightly, he didn't let go. Marco greeted us with his usual warmth, his eyes flickering to our joined hands before breaking into a broad smile. Ah, finally, he exclaimed, pulling us both into a hug. I wondered when you two would stop pretending. The way you look at each other. It was obvious from the first time you came here together. Andrew relaxed visibly at Marco's acceptance, and we enjoyed a beautiful dinner, allowing ourselves small touches and intimate glances that we'd previously suppressed. It felt like a breakthrough, a first step toward living more openly. However, our bubble of happiness was shattered when we left the restaurant. As we walked back to Andrew's car, we heard a familiar voice. Morrison, is that you? Andrew's hand immediately dropped from mine as we turned to face Officer Mike Thompson, his regular patrol partner. Mike's eyes moved between us, taking in our dressy clothes in close proximity. Hey, Mike. Andrew's voice was carefully neutral. Just grabbing dinner. Mike's expression hardened slightly. Yeah? Didn't know you were friends with... He paused, looking me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Matthew's a friend from the library," Andrew said quickly. "He helps with some of our community outreach programs." I felt each word like a physical blow, though I understood why he said them. Mike seemed skeptical, but nodded slowly. "Right. Well, see you tomorrow for shift." He walked away, but the damage was done. The drive back to my apartment was silent. When we arrived, Andrew gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Matt, I'm sorry," he whispered. I panicked." "I know," I said, though it hurt. "I understand." He turned to me, his eyes filled with pain and determination. "No, you don't understand. I'm not sorry about tonight. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell Mike the truth. That stops now." Andrew's decision to come out at work wasn't something he took lightly. We spent hours discussing it, planning how and when to do it. He wanted to tell his direct supervisor first, then his partner Mike, before it became general knowledge in the department. "I need you to understand," he said one night as we lay in bed. "This could affect my career. Some officers might not want to work with me, might not trust me to have their back." I propped myself up on an elbow to look at him. "If you want to wait." "No," he said firmly, pulling me closer. "I'm done waiting. I'm done hiding the best thing that's ever happened to me." The meeting with his sergeant went better than expected. Sergeant Martinez was a 20-year veteran who had seen enough changes in the department to take it in stride. "You're a good cop, Morrison," she said simply. "That's what matters to me. Just keep doing your job like you always have." Mike was a different story. Andrew told him during their patrol shift, parked in their usual spot for coffee break. When Andrew came to my apartment that evening, his expression was grim. "He asked for a new partner," Andrew said, sitting heavily on my couch, said he needed time to process, which is cop speak for, "I don't want to work with a gay officer." I sat beside him, taking his hand. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said, squeezing my hand. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely honest. Whatever happens now, at least I'm being true to myself, to us." Word spread quickly through the department. Some officers were supportive, others avoided Andrew entirely. A few made snide comments under their breath. But Andrew held his head high, did his job professionally, and gradually things began to settle into a new normal. His new partner, Officer Sarah Chen, was a young officer who didn't care about Andrew's sexuality. "My brother's gay," she told him matter-of-factly on their first patrol. "All I care about is if you'll have my back out there." As the months passed, our relationship deepened. Andrew's courage in coming out had changed him. He was more relaxed, more open, more himself. We started attending social events together, including the annual police department fundraiser, where Andrew proudly introduced me as his boyfriend to his colleagues. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Andrew came to my apartment looking exhausted, but oddly determined. He'd been involved in a dangerous situation, a domestic violence call that had turned violent. His quick thinking had saved both the victim and his partner, Sarah. "Something happened today," he said as we sat on the couch. "During that confrontation, all I could think about was you. Not about what others would think, not about my job, just you. About coming home to you." He took my hand, his usually confident voice slightly shaky. "Move in with me," he said. "I know my place is further from the library, but it's bigger, and I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to build a life with you." The decision was easy. Within weeks, my books were mingling with his on new shelves we'd bought together, my coffee mugs next to his protein shakers in the kitchen cabinets. We developed morning routines, me making coffee while he did push-ups, sharing quick kisses as he left for his early shifts. Sarah became a regular visitor, often joining us for dinner with her husband. Even Mike, Andrew's former partner, slowly came around. He showed up at our housewarming party, awkward but trying, and brought a plant as a gift. "Look," he told Andrew in the kitchen, not realizing I could hear them. "I was wrong. You're still the same guy who had my back all those years. Who you love, that doesn't change who you are as a cop, as a person. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out." Their reconciliation meant a lot to Andrew, though he'd never admit how much Mike's initial rejection had hurt him. It was another step toward full acceptance in the department, another validation that being honest had been the right choice. A year after moving in together, Andrew surprised me with a weekend trip to Provincetown. We talked about visiting, but had never found the right time. As we walked hand in hand along Commercial Street, surrounded by other couples who looked just like us, I could see Andrew completely at peace with himself. That evening, after dinner at a small seafood restaurant, we walked along the beach in the moonlight. Andrew seemed nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. "You know," he said, stopping to face me, "that night when I mistook you for a suspect, it was the best mistake I've ever made." Before I could respond, he dropped to one knee in the sand. "Matthew Parker, you made me brave enough to be myself. You showed me what real love looks like. Will you marry me?" The ring was simple, a platinum band that matched one he held for himself. Through tears, I managed to say yes, and he slipped the ring onto my finger before pulling me into a kiss. Our wedding was held the following spring in the public garden, where we'd had our first real conversation. Sarah stood as Andrew's best woman, while my sister was my witness. To our surprise, almost the entire police department showed up, many in uniform. Sergeant Martinez, now lieutenant, gave a speech about how Andrew's courage had helped other officers feel safe being themselves. Mike, who had become one of our strongest supporters, raised a toast. "To two people who taught me that love is love, and that sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest happiness." Now, as I write this, I'm watching Andrew get ready for his shift. He's been promoted to detective, and his precinct has one of the highest solve rates in the city. More importantly, he's become a mentor to younger LGBTQ+ officers, showing them that they can be both out and successful in law enforcement. "What are you thinking about?" he asks, catching me staring. "Just about how one rainy night and a case of mistaken identity changed everything," I reply. He comes over to kiss me goodbye, his badge glinting in the morning light. "Best arrest I never made," he says with a wink. As I watch him leave for work, I think about how life's biggest changes often come from unexpected moments. A police officer mistaking a librarian for a suspect, a moment of fear turning into love, and two people finding the courage to be themselves in a world that doesn't always make that easy. Sometimes the best stories aren't found in the books I work with every day, but in the real-life moments that transform us. Andrew and I found our happiness in an unlikely beginning, proving that love doesn't always come in the packages we expect. Sometimes it comes with a badge, a gun, and a case of mistaken identity.